Emergency alert. New York City. Hazardous atmospheric event. Shelter in place. Do not open windows or doors. Do not go outside. This is not a test.
Tommy is on the fourth floor landing and Delia is looking at him. Not at the thing. At the end of the hall. At him. Rosa is behind him, one hand on the rail, breathing through her mouth because the smell is bad up here. Copper and something underneath it that Tommy has been smelling on himself for 4 hours. The mist at the end of the corridor is low, moving, catching the emergency lighting in a way that regular mist doesn't. The sound from 4C stopped 20 minutes ago. That's worse than when it was making the sound. Delia says, "Tommy," he says, "I know." She says, "We need to go up." He says, "I know." She is still looking at him. She has been looking at him like this since the lobby, since Caleb checked his arm, since the room understood what the mottling meant. She is 54 years old and has lived in this building for 22 years, and she has a way of looking at people that makes them feel like she already knows the answer and is waiting to see if they'll tell the truth. He takes Rosa's arm. They go up.
Emergency alert. New York City. Confirmed hazardous event. Multiple boroughs affected. Do not open windows. Do not go outside. Emergency services active. Await further instruction.
July, 6 a.m. 4 hours before any of this. The building has a smell in summer that is specific to itself and not to summer. Old plaster and pipe dust, and the particular staleness of air that has been circulating through the same shafts since 1924. In winter, the smell is almost pleasant, something close to warmth. In July, it is just close, the kind of air that knows you're breathing it. The lobby at 6 in the morning holds it worse than anywhere. The tile floor amplifying the heat coming up from the basement, the single ceiling fan doing nothing but moving it around. Victor Asamoah has been standing in the lobby since 5:50. He stands here most mornings when the building gives him reasons to be anxious, and the building has been giving him reasons since April, when the boiler started making a sound that shouldn't come from a boiler. He fixed the sound, but not his certainty that the sound was trying to tell him something he hadn't understood yet. This morning, it's the heat. Not the boiler. The heat itself, the way it sat in the lobby overnight and didn't dissipate the way it should, the way it did in buildings with better seals and better windows and more money spent on them than this building has ever had. He has his clipboard. He is checking things off the clipboard, which is what he does when he needs to feel like the building is manageable. At 6:15, he goes back into 1A and turns on the HVAC. It's already 81 degrees in the lobby. He makes a note on the clipboard. He does not know what is in the air outside. On the third floor in 3C, Yuki Brennan is at her desk with headphones on and her second coffee cooling beside the keyboard. The headphones have nothing playing. She wears them with nothing playing because she finds the street impossible to tune out. She is running a model on next quarter's churn data. The window behind her is open 3 inches, the way she keeps it in summer. Enough for air, but not enough to let in the sounds from the street below. Through the gap the morning comes in, a truck idling, someone's music from a car, the wet heat smell of New York in July. Garbage and concrete, and whatever the river puts into the air when the wind comes from that direction. On the 5th floor in 5B, Nadia Osei is reading. She reads in the mornings when she can't sleep, which is most mornings now at 7 months, and she has worked her way through 3 books in the last 2 weeks. This morning, it is something about the history of salt. She picked it from Caleb Schuff, a gift from his mother. and found it immediately absorbing in the way that very specific books about very specific things become absorbing when your brain needs somewhere to go that isn't your own body. Caleb is asleep beside her. He worked a 12-hour shift yesterday and came home at 10 and ate standing at the kitchen counter and was asleep by 10:30. She lets him sleep. She reads about salt evaporation ponds in medieval France. Outside the window, the city is already loud. Garbage trucks, a delivery driver on the intercom of the building next door, the particular bass frequencies of a subway car. She can feel through the floor before she hears it. The window is open and the July morning comes in, and she can smell the street, and she can smell something else underneath it, but she doesn't know yet what the something else is. She turns a page. She keeps reading. Ray Delgado gets home at 6:30. He has been on his feet since 8 the previous evening, and his lower back is doing the thing it does after a double, a grinding ache along the right side that he manages with ibuprofen and the knowledge that it will be worse in 10 years if he doesn't deal with it now, and that he will deal with it later. He takes off his shoes in the hallway because the floors in 4A are thin, and he knows Delia in 4B is a light sleeper. He puts his keys on the hook. He drinks a glass of water at the kitchen sink, looking out at the air shaft and the brick wall of the next building. He is tired in the full-body way of a man who has been moving heavy things for 10 hours, the kind of tired that makes thought feel like an extra expense. He goes to bed at 6:40. He is asleep within minutes. At 7:03, his phone goes off. The emergency alert. He sits up in the dark of his bedroom and reads the words and reads them again. He has lived in Upper Manhattan his whole life. He grew up 4 blocks from this building, in an apartment that his grandmother's grandmother moved into in 1959, and he has a particular relationship with emergency instructions from the city that is shaped by 47 years of watching how those instructions work for some people and how they work for others. He gets dressed. He goes into the hallway. In 2A, Rosa Fuentes is awake before 6 because she is 78 and sleep has become a negotiation. She gets what it's willing to give her and doesn't complain because complaining is for people who believe things can be different. She has her coffee and her rosary, which is the one she had before Tommy, before his mother, before most of the things that constitute her life in this building. The beads are dark wood, almost black with handling, a silver crucifix worn smooth at the intersection. She works them without thinking about it, the way she breathes, the repetition doing something to her mind that she has never tried to explain to anyone who didn't already know. She is watching the morning news with the sound low because Tommy is asleep down the hall, and the floor between his room and the living room is thin, in the way of pre-war floors, thin in a way that used to bother her when he was small, and doesn't now that he's 19, and she's learned to file what bothers her. She can smell it through the window. Copper, she thinks, like old pipes. She gets up and closes the window and goes back to her rosary. Tommy is in the basement at 6 because he couldn't sleep either, but not for Rosa's reasons. He has been not sleeping since May, since the acceptance letter. He didn't open until it was too late to respond, since the shame of that. A letter sitting on the kitchen table for 11 days while Rosa made breakfast around it and didn't ask because she knew. And he knew she knew, and neither of them said anything. He told himself he was protecting her from the conversation. He knows now, in the way you know things at 6 in the morning in a basement, that he was protecting himself. He'd heard about the service door for Marcus in 2B next door. Who'd heard it from a guy who used to live in the building on 148th. Old coal infrastructure, pre-war, the buildings connected underground. A way out that wasn't the front door, wasn't the conversation at the kitchen table, wasn't the expression on Rosa's face when she understood he was leaving. He told himself he was just looking. The door was already open when he found it. The door was open and the mist was inside, low along the floor, barely visible in the light from his phone. A thin layer of it, like something had been breeding there and left the breath behind. He didn't know what the mist was. He pulled the door open further and caught his left forearm on a piece of exposed bracket, rusted, the kind of thing that should have been dealt with 50 years ago. The cut came away 3 inches long, not deep, more of a drag than a slice. He wiped it on his jeans. He stood looking at the door and what was on the other side. Darkness, the smell of old coal and copper and something he couldn't name. And then he went back upstairs. The alert went off at 7:03 while he was making coffee. Every phone in the building simultaneously, that particular emergency tone, the one that goes through you before you've read the words. He read the words. He looked at the cut on his arm. He put on a long-sleeved shirt. Victor comes out of 1A at 7:04 and stands in the lobby, and within 4 minutes has 6 of them. The instinct to gather is strong in this building. It is that kind of building, the kind where people know each other's names and approximate schedules, and the sound of each other's footsteps overhead. Delia brings Rosa down from 2A. Rosa in her house slippers, her rosary wrapped around her left hand, the dark beads catching the lobby light. Yuki comes with her laptop already open, already pulling the city alert system, anything that names what this is. Caleb and Nadia come down together, Caleb's hand on the small of Nadia's back, his face doing the thing that Nadia has learned to read in 2 years of watching him navigate other people's emergencies. Outside through the lobby glass, the street is visible, empty in the way it isn't usually empty. At 7 a.m., the sidewalk's clear. A single car pulled to the curb with its hazards on and nobody inside. The mist is there, low along the street, thinner than it will be later, and in the early July light it doesn't look wrong yet. It looks like something that has a reasonable explanation. It looks like something that will be identified on the news within the hour. Ray Delgado comes last. He has the flat effect of a man who has been awake for 22 hours and has just been told he needs to be awake for more. He says, "Everyone, close your windows." He says it before Victor says anything. Victor says, "I was about to say that." Ray says, "Then say it faster next time." Victor opens his mouth and closes it. He has managed this building for 14 years, and his authority here has never been questioned before today. He looks at Ray with an expression that will not survive the morning. Tommy closes the basement door. He closed it at 6:15 when he came back up, but he goes and checks it again and closes it again. He stands with his back to the room for a moment, his right hand on the door handle. Then he turns around and sits on the bottom stair. Rosa says, "It smells like copper." The group looks at her. She says, "Outside, through the windows, before I close mine. Can't you smell it?" Yuki says, "I can't smell anything." Delia says, "I can't either." Tommy says, "I think it's the mist." He says it like he's guessing. His left arm is against his body, the long sleeve covering everything. The shirt is already warm. It is going to get warmer. Rosa looks at him. She doesn't say anything. She works the rosary beads, the dark wood moving through her fingers, the silver crucifix catching the light and losing it.
Emergency alert. New York City. Critical update. Exposure to atmospheric hazard may cause severe internal bleeding. Do not allow open wounds to be exposed to outdoor air. Seek immediate shelter. Emergency services overwhelmed. Await instruction.
The lobby goes quiet in the particular way it goes quiet when a room of people all stop breathing at the same time. Caleb reads the alert twice. Then he says, "Open wounds." He looks at the group. He says, "Has anyone been outside this morning? Has anyone been outside with a cut or an open wound?" Victor, Inside since last night. Delia, inside since yesterday evening. Ray just came back from his shift. No cuts he knows of. Holds up his palms, turns them over. Presents both wrists. Yuki hasn't been outside. Nadia, inside. Rosa, inside. Tommy says, inside. Caleb says, "You sure?" Tommy says, "Yeah." Caleb nods and moves on. He has the first aid kit from Yuki's apartment, the one Yuki brought down without being asked, and he is doing a methodical check, looking at hands, wrists, the visible skin of forearms. He works his way around the group the way he works around a ward, calmly, without drama, doing the thing in front of him. When he gets to Tommy, he looks at his hands. Tommy turns them over. Caleb looks at the forearms. Tommy is wearing a long-sleeved shirt in July, in a lobby with no air conditioning. Caleb says, "You can push up the sleeves if you're warm." Tommy says, "I'm fine." Caleb holds his gaze for a moment. Then he moves to Rosa, checks her hands, finds nothing. Delia is watching Tommy from across the lobby. Yuki has the laptop open and is reading fast, pulling reports from other cities, cross-referencing the alert language with what she's finding. She reads aloud: early stage, metallic taste, temperature sensitivity, mild confusion, intermediate, modeling at the exposure site, disorientation, involuntary movement. She stops. Caleb says, "Late stage is systemic hemorrhage." He says it quietly, the way you say the part people need to hear, but nobody wants to say out loud. He says the blood thickens and clots, and the affected individual dies from inside. Nadia says, "How long? How long from exposure?" Caleb looks at the reports on Yuki's screen. He says the reports from Seoul and Frankfurt are saying 4 to 6 hours from the moment of exposure through an open wound. He looks at the group. He says, "That's the timeline we're working with." Tommy is sitting on the bottom stair. He has his left arm across his body, his right hand resting over the forearm, not pressing. He is looking at the floor and he is doing the arithmetic. 6 a.m. 4 to 6 hours. It is 7:41 a.m. On the outside edge, he has until noon. On the inside edge, he has until 10 a.m. An hour and 19 minutes. He sits very still and he does the arithmetic again because the first time he might have made a mistake. He gets the same answer. He does it a third time. Same answer. The shirt is warm. He is aware of his left arm in a continuous way. The way you're aware of a thing that is doing something you don't want it to do. The cut has been itching since 6:30, a low, persistent itch that he has not scratched because scratching means touching it, and touching it means knowing how it feels, and knowing how it feels means knowing what it means. He has been not knowing all morning. He has become efficient at it. Caleb is talking to the group about what the intermediate stage looks like, what to watch for, how quickly it moves. Tommy listens. He is waiting to see how quickly Caleb arrives at the thing he is not saying. He is also aware, at the edge of his attention, that Rosa is looking at him. She has been looking at him on and off for the last 20 minutes, the way she looks at him when she knows something. She doesn't say anything. She works her beads. Dark wood. Silver crucifix. He has known that rosary his whole life. He knows it better than he knows most things.
Emergency alert. New York City. Seal all entry points immediately. Building HVAC systems may distribute hazard. Disable HVAC if possible. Do not open any windows or doors. Seek medical attention if available. Emergency services cannot respond at this time.
Victor goes pale and says, "The HVAC." The lobby waits. He says, I turned the system on this morning. 6:30. Ray says, you circulated it through every floor. Victor says, I didn't know what the mist was. Nobody knew what the mist was. The silence holds both facts. Yuki says, how do we shut it down? Victor says, the main shutoff is in the basement. He looks at the basement door. He says, I'll go. It takes him about 4 minutes. He comes back breathing harder than 4 minutes of walking should produce. He says the HVAC is off. He has a scratch on his right wrist, below the shirt cuff, a thin red line. He pulls the cuff down. Tommy sees it. He sits on the bottom stair and he sees it and he says nothing. Outside through the lobby glass, 2 figures appear on the sidewalk. Hazmat suits, full gear, the white Tyvek with the respirators and the face shields, the kind Tommy has only seen on television. They are moving with purpose, east along the street, carrying equipment he can't identify from here. The group goes very still watching them. Ray says, hey! He moves toward the door. He says, hey! He raises his hand against the glass. The figures don't stop. They move past the building, past the lobby window, east toward the corner. One of them turns their head, and for a moment is looking directly at the glass, at the 8 of them arranged in the lobby, and then the figure turns away and they continue east and disappear around the corner. The lobby is quiet. Nadia says, why didn't they stop? Nobody answers. Victor says, they're responding to something else. He says it like a man who needs things to have explanations. He says, they'll circle back. Ray says nothing. He stands at the glass for another moment, looking at the empty street where the figures were, and then he comes back. The heat builds. July in New York with 8 people in the lobby and no HVAC and every window sealed. Victor brings a chair from 1A for Nadia. Rosa sits on the bottom stair where Tommy was sitting, and Tommy stands. Yuki's laptop is at 40%. Ray stands near the lobby door, looking out at the street, which is empty again and stays that way. No more hazmat figures. No more cars. No sound from outside at all, which is its own kind of wrong in New York. The loudness of the city's absence. Victor starts talking about the boiler pressure. He says the boiler needs checking. The pressure needs to be at 47. Ray says, Victor. Victor says, 47. The gauge should read 47. Ray says, the boiler isn't running, Victor. Victor looks at him. He says, 47. Ray looks at Caleb. Caleb says quietly, Victor, come sit down. Victor sits. He does not stop counting. 3, 4, 3, 4. Not out loud, but his lips are moving, the numbers visible if you watch his face. His brain cycling through a sequence it has lost the context for, but not the motion. Kayla pulls Nadia aside for a moment. They speak in low voices. Nadia nods. She comes back and sits in her chair and puts both hands on her stomach and looks at the window. Rosa is working her rosary. She has been working it since before the alerts, and she will work it after, because the rosary is not about outcome. It is about the motion of the hands while the mind tries to hold more than it can hold. Her lips move sometimes, not with words, just with the movement of a person who has been having a private conversation for 50 years. Yuki has her laptop on her knees. She is cataloging the reports from other cities, Seoul, Frankfurt, Sao Paulo, Johannesburg, building a picture of the progression timeline, the exposure variables, the survival data from the limited cases where there is survival data. She does this because it is the thing she knows how to do, and because doing the thing she knows how to do keeps her inside her own competence, where it is briefly less frightening. The data is not comforting. She doesn't share most of it. She makes a document, entitles it, and then closes the document. Ray is at the stairwell window on the south end of the lobby. looking up at the sky over the buildings to the south. He says, "I can see it moving." He means the mist. He says, "It's thicker to the south." He says, "But it's moving north." He says this flatly, like a man reading a gauge. He says nothing else for several minutes. Then he says, "My mother evacuated for Hugo in '89. He says, "She said the worst part was the waiting." He says, "Not knowing if you'd done the right thing by staying or by going." He says, "She stayed, and the house was fine." She said she never knew if she was brave or lucky. Nobody responds to this either, but it sits in the lobby differently than the other silences. From somewhere above them, 4 floors up, through the ceiling and the floors between, there is a sound from 4C. It is a human sound, but it is also not quite a human sound, the way a voice becomes not quite a voice when it is producing something the body wasn't designed to produce. It is low at first and becomes something else. It goes on for a while and then it stops. The stopping is immediate and total, like a switch, and the quality of silence in the lobby changes when it stops. Everyone heard it. Nobody says anything about it. Rosa's hands go still on the rosary. Nadia closes her eyes. Caleb watches Victor, who keeps counting. 3, 4, 3, 4. Delia says, "We need to move up." She says, "Away from the lobby glass." Ray says, "Higher is safer." Delia says, "The mist is ground level." Every report says ground level. Higher is better than lower. Ray says, "Victor should stay down here." The rule looks at Victor. Victor is counting. 3, 4, 3, 4. Caleb says, "Victor comes with us." Ray says, "Caleb." Caleb says, "He comes with us." They go up. Because Rosa can make 4 flights and not 5, they stop at 4. The 4th floor hallway is narrow and hot. The emergency lighting gives everything a red-orange wash, the kind of light that makes people look like versions of themselves. They arrange along the wall opposite 4C, which is the furthest from the stairwell door and the nearest to the window at the end of the hall. Ray's idea, the window being a potential exit point if exit becomes necessary, though the window looks out onto a fire escape that looks out onto the street, and the street is not somewhere they want to be. Nadia takes the wall with her back against it and her feet flat on the floor and her hands on her stomach. She has stopped reading people's faces. She has been reading faces all morning and the faces are not telling her things she wants to know. She looks at the middle distance and she breathes carefully and she counts her own breaths, which is something she learned in a prenatal class that she went to without Caleb because Caleb was working, and which turns out to be useful in situations the prenatal class did not anticipate. She does not think about the baby specifically. She thinks about the breath. In, out, in. Caleb is beside her. He has one hand in hers and his eyes on Victor, who is sitting against the opposite wall with his back straight and his knees up and his lips still moving. 3, 4, 3, 4. Caleb has seen this before, not this specifically, but the particular way a brain navigates around damage, the loops it finds and runs when the straight paths close. Victor's brain has found a loop and is running it. Caleb watches for the moment the loop changes, because when the loop changes, something else has changed too. He checks his watch. He checks Nadia's face. He checks Victor. He does this on a rotation, methodically, the way he does assessments. Rosa is next to Tommy. She has her rosary in both hands now, the beads passing through her fingers at the pace she uses when she is not praying but needs her hands to be doing something. She is looking at the door to 4C. She is 78 and she has outlived people she loved, and she is not easily frightened. She sat with her husband for 9 days at the end, and she was not frightened then, not exactly, though the word she would use is not a word she has in English. In Spanish she has it, acompañar, to be with. The sound from 4C before it stopped was the kind of sound that you don't put anywhere useful, the kind that just stays. She works her beads. She is not praying for herself. Ray is at the stairwell window looking south at the sky above the buildings. He says, "The mist is thinner," he says. "I think it's actually thinner than it was an hour ago." Nobody responds. He watches the sky. After a while, he says, "I can see a helicopter. Far south, not moving this way, but there." Someone else responds to this. Yuki looks up. Then the helicopter is gone. Delia is at the end of the hallway, standing, because she could not make herself sit. She has been the person in this building who stood when others sat for 22 years. She stands. She is also watching Tommy, who is next to Rosa with his left arm across his body and his right hand over the forearm. He has been sitting this way for 2 hours. The awareness of how he is sitting is visible to anyone paying attention. Delia is paying attention. Yuki opens her laptop. 4% battery. She reads for a moment and then closes it again without sharing what she found. She looks at the ceiling. She says, "I have a deadline on Friday." She says it to the ceiling, not to anyone specifically. Ray looks at her. She says, "A report, quarterly. I was going to finish it tonight." She is quiet for a moment. Then she says, "I don't know why I said that." Nobody tells her why she said that, but Ray nods. The sound from 4C does not return. Whatever was making the sound is no longer making it. The silence from 4C has a quality not empty but finished. The distinction between a room where nobody is saying anything and a room where there is nobody left to say anything. Ray, at the window, turns from the glass and looks at the door of 4C, and then looks away and goes back to the window.
Emergency alert. New York City. Fatalities confirmed. Affected individuals may exhibit confusion, disorientation, involuntary movement. Do not approach affected individuals. Secure your location. This event is ongoing.
Kayla says, "Rosa, will you take Nadia's hand for a moment?" Rosa moves without asking why. She is good at moving without asking why. She takes Nadia's hand, and Nadia holds it, and Caleb stands up and goes to Victor. He crouches in front of Victor. He says, "Victor?" Victor says, 3, 4, 3, 4. Caleb says, "I need you to look at me." Victor looks at him. Caleb says, "Show me your wrist." Victor says, "I'm fine." Caleb says, "I know. Show me anyway." Victor pulls up his cuff. The scratch from the basement is worse than an hour ago. Mottled at its edges, the skin discolored in a ring that is spread, the same pattern that the reports describe in the intermediate stage, the pattern that the intermediate stage becomes before it becomes the late stage. Ray says, "Jesus." Caleb says, "Victor, can you hear me?" Victor says, 47. Caleb stands up. He looks at the group. He says, "We need to talk about Victor." Ray says, "We need to move him somewhere else." Nadia says, "Caleb." Caleb says, "I know." He says, "The alert says affected individuals may exhibit involuntary movement." He says, "I need everyone to understand what that means." It means at a certain point, Victor would not be directing his own body. He says, "We need to decide what to do before that point." The hallway is quiet. Rosa says, "Tommy?" He says, "Nana." She says, "Show me your arm." She says it in the voice she uses when the time for managing something is over. She does not raise it. She does not have to. She has been using this voice his whole life and he has never successfully resisted it. He pushes up his left sleeve.
Emergency alert. New York City. Update. Outdoor hazard dissipating in some areas. Seek medical attention immediately if exposed. Emergency services responding. Await specific instructions. Do not go outside until instructed.
The cut is 6 hours old. The mottling extends 2 inches in every direction from it. The skin bruised and discolored. The same pattern as Victor's wrist, but further along by hours. Caleb is beside him before the sleeve is fully up. He takes Tommy's arm in both hands, and he looks at the cut and the mottling and Tommy's face and Tommy's eyes. He checks the eyes the way he checks eyes when he needs to know what's happening inside a person. He takes his time. He says, "How long?" Tommy says, "6 this morning." The group is very still. Caleb says, 6 a.m.? Tommy says, "Yeah." Caleb says, "Did you know?" When the alert started, "Did you know?" Tommy says, "Yes." Caleb holds his arm. He doesn't let go. He says, "Tommy, I have to be honest with you." Rosa says, "Don't." Caleb says, "Rosa." Rosa says, "Don't you tell him that." She says it with the full weight of 78 years and a bad hit and a grandson she raised from the age of 4 when his mother left and his father was already gone. She says, "He is 19 years old and he is right here in front of me. Don't you tell him that in this hallway." The hallway is very quiet. Ray is looking at the floor. Yuki is looking at Caleb. Nadia has both hands on her stomach. Her eyes are closed. Delia is looking at Tommy, just at Tommy. Tommy says, "It's okay, Nana." He says it and he means it in a way that nobody in the room can do anything with. Delia moves to where Tommy is standing. She doesn't make a production of it. She just moves so she is next to him, and the rest of the group gives them a few feet of hallway, the consideration of people who are trying to pretend they are not listening. She says quietly, "You knew this morning?" He says, "Yes." She says, "When you came up from the basement?" He looks at her. He says, "You saw me?" She says, "Through the stairwell window, 6:15. I thought you'd been down there to check something for Victor." He says, "I was down there to check something, just not for Victor." She waits. She has learned in 22 years of this building that waiting is faster than asking. He says, "There's a door in the far wall of the basement behind the utility panel. Old coal-era door connects through the infrastructure to the building on 148. He says, "I heard about it from Marcus in 2B. He says, "I thought if it was real, if the door actually went through." He stops. He says, "The front door goes past Rosa's room." He says, "She has always known when I come and go." He says, "I've always known she knows." He says, "I couldn't figure out how to leave without her knowing I was going." Delia says, "Where were you going to go?" He says, "I don't know exactly. Away? Just away from here." He looks at the hallway floor. He says, "I had this idea that if I could get out without anyone seeing me go, I could figure out the rest later. I could just be gone and then be somewhere else, and then figure out what that somewhere else looked like." He says, "I know how that sounds." She says, "It sounds like 19. He is quiet for a moment. She says, "There was a letter." He looks at her. She says, "I get my mail from the same box." I saw the envelope. I recognized the school logo from when my nephew applied. He says, "I didn't open it until it was too late." He says, "I kept telling myself I'd open it tomorrow, and then it had been 11 days and it was too late to respond, and I put it in the recycling." He says, "Rosa never asked me about it." He says, "She never asked me and I never said anything, and the letter was just gone." He says, "But it wasn't gone." Delia says, "No." She says, Things don't go where we put them. He says the door was open when I got there. The mist was already inside. I didn't know what it was. I pulled the door open and caught my arm on a bracket, and He stops. He says, I stood there for a minute looking at what was on the other side, which was just more basement, just dark and the smell. And I thought, here it is, the way out, and it wasn't anything. It was just another basement. He says, and then I went back upstairs and made coffee and the alerts went off. Delia is quiet. She says she knew you wanted to go. Tommy, she's known for years. He says, I know. She says the letter, the basement door, the long sleeve shirt in July. She knows all of it. He looks at Rosa across the hallway, at the dark rosary beads and the worn silver crucifix moving through her fingers. Rosa working her beads. Rosa watching him in the way she has always watched him. Not surveillance, not suspicion. The presence of someone who decided long ago that watching over a person is its own sufficient purpose. He says, I know. Delia says, she's still here. He says, I know.
Emergency alert. New York City. Evacuation corridors now open. Proceed to designated assembly points. Emergency services responding. This event is ongoing.
Ray reads the alert first. He reads it and rereads it, and then he stands up. He says, it's dissipating. He says, we go. The decision made, immediate, no deliberation visible. Yuki doesn't move. She is looking at her closed laptop. She is thinking something through, and it is taking time she doesn't have, and she knows it is taking time she doesn't have, and she cannot make herself stop thinking it through. Ray says, Yuki. She says the alert says await specific instructions. Ray says emergency services are unavailable. 2 people in this hallway are in active exposure progression, and we're sitting in a building that circulated contaminated air through every floor for 30 minutes this morning. He says, I am going. Yuki says, the mist might not be gone. Ray says, it's going. She doesn't move. Caleb crosses the hallway and takes her arm. He doesn't say anything. He just takes her arm and she looks at him and she stands up and picks up her laptop and she goes. Caleb looks at Nadia. Nadia says, let's go. She says it in the voice she has been using all morning, the voice of someone who made a decision some time ago and is just implementing it. The group moves. Ray first, then Yuki, then Caleb and Nadia together taking the stairs slowly, Caleb's hand on Nadia's back. Delia stands. She looks at Rosa. She looks at Tommy. Tommy says, go with Delia, Nana. He says, please. Rosa says his name. 2 syllables. The second one slightly longer. The specific music of it. The weight of a lifetime of saying it in every register. Worried, laughing, exasperated, proud. He says, I'll be right behind you. Delia takes Rosa's arm. Rosa's hand finds Delia's, the rosary wrapped between their palms, the dark beads and the silver crucifix held between 2 hands. They go to the stairwell. Tommy stands in the hallway. Victor against the wall. Victor is looking at the wall and his expression is the expression of a man standing at a threshold that doesn't have a door, looking through to something on the other side. He has been the super of this building for 14 years. He turned on the HVAC at 6:30 because it was hot and he was doing his job. The mist at the far end of the corridor is thinner than it was. Not gone, thinner. Moving in the emergency lighting, low along the floor, patient. Tommy looks at his left arm, the sleeve pushed down. He pushes it up. He looks at the cut, the modeling, the skin that has been telling him something all morning. The itch he didn't scratch. The arithmetic he did 3 times and got the same answer. He pushes the sleeve back down. He has been in this building his whole life. He knows the sound it makes at night, the specific creak of the 4th floor boards in cold weather, the way the pipes in 2A knock in winter mornings before the heat comes up. He knows which neighbors take packages that aren't theirs, and which ones leave food outside 5B when they know Caleb is on nights. He knows where Victor keeps the spare keys and where the door in the basement leads. The door in the basement leads to another basement. He knows that now in a way he didn't know it at 6 this morning. He goes down the stairs, to the lobby, past the chair Victor brought from 1A, past the basement door, out through the front of the building into July and New York, the heat hitting him like a solid thing, the sun on his face, the street in front of him. The mist is thinner out here than it looked from the window, dissipating in the heat, breaking apart against the light. He can smell it, copper and something underneath, the something that has been on him since 6 in the morning. He can taste it in the back of his throat, faint and metallic. He has been tasting it all day. He is tasting it now. He walks.
Emergency alert. New York City. Evacuation corridors now open. Proceed to designated assembly points. Emergency services responding. This event is ongoing.